Good morning. Hi, my name is Megan Ryan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. This marks the 5th day of Sunshine Week, which is an annual week centered around March 16th, always covering March 16th, which was James Madison's birthday. And Madison is sort of considered to be the founding father of the open government movement, if you will. Although the Roanoke Times had a great editorial today talking about how Patrick Henry may have had it wrong on the Constitution, but he was ahead of his time in terms of talking about secrecy. That secrecy in government wasn't good. He's talking about the meetings of the Continental Congress that were closed. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, not the Continental Congress, but meetings and what FOIA requires of a meeting so that the public can observe it, because here is where the decisions that affect everyday Virginians take place. And most of these are coming from elected boards. Usually, these rules apply to all public bodies, which we'll get to in a second. But a huge majority of those are elected boards. And so the meetings give us as citizens a chance to observe our elected officials in action, to see what they say about things, how they vote about things, and then we can decide whether or not that those decisions and those comments best represent us when it comes to election time the next year. So also, it's built into the policy statement of the Freedom of Information Act that that these rules exist since, quote, at all times the public is to be the beneficiary of all actions. Business is not supposed to be conducted in a, quote, atmosphere of secrecy. So right there in the policy statement of FOIA, it says this is why this law exists. And there are places, there's also an admonition to construe procedures broadly in favor of access and to construe exemptions narrowly also in favor of access. So with those thoughts in mind, let's get started on our presentation here. I'm going to be doing a screen share here so you don't have to watch the shadows constantly play on the back of my wall here. And we're going to start with the basic, that FOIA's meeting provisions apply to a public body. The definition of a public body is pretty lengthy, but we usually know what we're talking about when we say it. City councils, boards of supervisors, school boards, state agencies, state agency boards and commissions. The definition of a public body also includes, though, the committees, task forces, commissions, or whatever you want to call them that are created by those entities. Now, there are two important caveats to this general understanding of what a public body is. One is that an entity must be supported wholly or principally by public funds to be considered a public body under FOIA. That's why we have no difficulty, saying, oh yeah, well, a board of supervisors, well, of course, it's supported wholly by public funds. But it does mean where it starts getting a little bit questionable is when you have a group that may have a contract or a relationship with government, but if it doesn't receive most or all of its financing from taxpayer dollars, it won't be subject to FOIA's meetings provision. The other caveat is that the definition of public bodies extends to the committees, et cetera, created by that public body, but not to committees and task forces and whatnot created by an individual, like a mayor or a school superintendent or a sheriff or a governor. This is happening right now in Richmond, where the mayor has appointed a commission to look into Monument Avenue statues. So we also saw this under both former governors, McAuliffe and McDonnell, both created task forces to examine various issues. And though many of the meetings were open to the public, both governors were very adamant about the fact that it was not bound by FOIA's meeting requirements. And that's true because an individual is not a public body, and it was an individual's committee that had been appointed. On the other hand, to be sure that even a committee or a task force or a work group, or the governor's work groups or the mayor's commission, those public bodies will be subject to FOIA's records requirements. Maybe not its meetings requirements, but it is subject to its records requirements. To be a meeting that triggers the rest of FOIA's rules and requirements, there have to be 3 or more members of the public body gathered to discuss public business. Now, if the entire public body is only 3 people, then 2 people meeting would trigger FOIA's meeting provisions. And if you think that that sounds hypothetical or crazy, there is an instance in Nottoway County just last week, or maybe earlier this week, where they were using 3-person committees, which meant that when 2 of them got together, that was a public meeting. One of the supervisors was quoted as saying that was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. Nonetheless, that is what the statute says. It has to be these people gathered to discuss public business. Now, public business is not defined in FOIA, but it is interpreted nearly universally to include just about anything that government does. So it's not dependent on whether or not there's a vote or an action being taken. Whatever it does, whatever it oversees, that's going to be considered public business. Now, it doesn't include staff meetings, and it doesn't include other meetings or gatherings of employees, nor does it include the 2-by-2 meetings of a public body that are sometimes called daisy chain meetings, serial meetings, Noah's Ark meetings. Those are different from what the supervisor was complaining about. That was a meeting, a 2-by-2 meeting was a public meeting because 2 people constituted a quorum of that public body. What this is talking about is that members can contact each other to find out what their various positions are on a particular issue. Over the years, however, this has morphed into a full-blown, 2-by-2 meetings that can take the form of one member calling another member who calls a third member, and then the first member calls the fourth member, and so on and so on and so on. Or it may be when members of a public body meet in groups of 2 with an administrator or manager or staff person. And then that same staff person meets with another 2 people so that they can convey various information without having to call a public meeting. Now, another time this may happen is when members of multiple public bodies and maybe staff want to get together to discuss a regional or area-wide problem. And each public body will send just 2 members so as not to trigger FOIA. This was done recently in Charlottesville, I noticed, when the county, schools, sheriff, staff, city, and others wanted to talk about school safety without the public or media present. So the elected bodies, the county and the schools and the city, all sent just 2 people so as not to trigger FOIA's meeting requirements. The meeting provisions are not triggered either when members of a board or a public body bump into each other around town. Now, this is a reflection of the reality, especially in small towns, but not exclusively, that people belong to the same clubs and churches or civic groups, or may run into each other at school functions, or even while examining bell peppers at the local grocery store. This encounter, however, cannot have been prearranged, and when they start talking over the bell peppers, they're not supposed to talk about public business. If 3 or more members of a board attend the same public forum, the talk will surely come around to public business, but FOIA also makes allowances for that, so long as they're not discussing public business among themselves and themselves only. Now, some boards are extra careful, and this is because even though they are doing the right thing and they're not discussing the public business, the public sees them talking and automatically gets suspicious. That may be unfair, but that is, I think, human nature. When people see any group talking, they like to project what they think they're talking about. So when they're being extra careful, they think about who will be attending what function, and where they're standing, and what they say publicly. As an example, several years ago, 3 members of VCOG's board of directors also served at the same time on the FOIA Council, which is a state agency with a board. So when we talked about VCOG business, all 3 of them stayed in the room. But if we started talking about things going on at the FOIA Council, one of them would leave just to make sure that they weren't accidentally triggering FOIA's meeting requirements. Now, before a public body can hold a meeting, it must give notice of the meeting. It must tell the public when and where the meeting will take place. There are 3 locations that are required to be posted. It might surprise some people to know that the newspaper is not one of those required places. But we know that as for most areas, for local public bodies, they are going to give local media time announcements and notice about meetings that those papers or TV or radio stations will disseminate. But it's not required under the statute. It is required now for them to put it on their website if they have a website, and most localities and most boards now do. The notice has to include the date, the time, the location of the meeting. And for regularly scheduled meetings, the notice must be given at least 3 working days before the meeting. Now, that's for regularly scheduled meetings. These are different from the special hearings that might precede certain kinds of decisions, like redistricting at schools or zoning variances, adoption of ordinances. Those all require a special public hearing, and that notice does have to go in newspapers usually, and requires much more advanced time frame, so that the public has plenty of chances to arrange their schedule so that they can attend and participate. The 3-day notice time also doesn't necessarily apply to specially called meetings. And meetings can be specially called for any number of reasons. They can be emergency, but they can also just be, hey, we have a lot to do, so we need to have another meeting. And in those cases, whatever kind of notice is reasonable under the circumstance is required. And whatever that is, and we've seen it as few as 20 minutes before a meeting, but whenever it is, the notice has to be given to the public at the same time that it's given to members of the public body. A public body also has to allow members of the public to record the meeting if they want to, so long as it doesn't interfere with the meeting. And the public body can't hold meetings in locations that prohibit recording devices. This little tidbit was added a few years back when some public bodies wanted to meet in courthouses, but local judges prohibited recording devices in the buildings. So the public was prohibited from recording a city council meeting, even though if it had been held in another building, they would have been allowed to. So there are, let's see, the public may be surprised to hear this, but there's no requirement in FOIA that there be a public comment period for public meetings. Of course, we have come to know that public comment periods are nearly universal at regular meetings. That's a good thing. It is not required, though. Now, again, this is not for those specially mandated public hearings, the rezoning, the school redistricting, etc. But this is for the everyday work of the government of the public body for a local government, a school district, or a state agency. Now, for 2 years in a row, there's been proposed legislation to put a public comment period into FOIA, making it clear that public bodies still have the right to adopt specific rules, but just saying, hey, there's got to be one. These efforts have been defeated the past 2 years, but the FOIA Council is supposed to study the issue over the summer. Now, once once the meeting is underway, minutes have to be taken. The minutes have to include the date, time, location of the meeting, just like the notice did, but also who was present, and a summary of the discussion, and a record of any votes taken and how and who voted on what. There are no requirements for how detailed these minutes must be, and it definitely varies widely across the state. Some can be very detailed and comprehensive. Others can be very bare bones and maybe a page long for an hour-long meeting. I try to remind people that the minutes are actually historical records, and because they are supposed to be kept indefinitely according to the Public Records Act's retention schedule set by the Library of Virginia. But and so these serve as historical records of the public body that is helpful not only to the public now, but to the public and the public bodies themselves in the future. Oh, one more thing. Sorry about the minutes. I forgot to add that, so FOIA says specifically that minutes are not public records, even draft minutes. I mean, God, what is wrong with me? Excuse me. Alert, alert, alert. FOIA specifically says that minutes are public records. My goodness. Even draft minutes. Yes, draft minutes are public records. And that is true even if the minutes are what might be considered unapproved or unofficial. Those kinds of constructs of approving minutes or adopting minutes, those are just internal rules. They don't affect the characterization of the minutes as public records. So and that would also apply to recordings of the minutes. Now, a public body has to discuss most of its business in the open, but it can hold certain discussions behind closed doors. It can invite staff or even members of the public to come in, but it also has the right to exclude anyone or everyone else except the members. They don't have to keep minutes in the closed session, but they also cannot take a final vote on anything they talk about. They can take straw polls, but those internal votes don't count until they come out of session and vote in public. Before they go into a closed session, the members of the public body have to make a motion in the minutes that state the subject matter of the meeting, the purpose of the meeting, and the statutory exemption that allows the closed meeting. An example of a motion might be a motion to go into closed session to discuss the acquisition of real estate on which to build a new elementary school as allowed by 2.2-3711A3. The statute says that just citing the statute itself, you know, the 2.2-3711A3, that's not enough. So there has to be more to it. It's supposed to be to give the public enough information to have some notion of what's being discussed without giving away too much so as to defeat the need for a closed session in the first place. There are currently 51 reasons in FOIA that a public body can go into closed session. That sounds like a lot, and it is, but the reality is that most of the exemptions are limited to a specific agency or a very specific topic. Most public bodies can't use most of the exemptions. The most likely used exemptions, to my knowledge, are the exemptions for personnel discussions, ones for attorney advice, contract negotiations, student discipline, and public safety and security plans. All of these, you might notice, have counterparts in the records exemption category, and those are also very frequently the ones cited when records are being withheld. There are also exemptions that would allow for the discussion of the investment of public funds when public disclosure would jeopardize the public's bargaining position, and for economic development. As with the FOIA exemptions and records, the exemptions for meetings are discretionary. Nothing in FOIA requires that a discussion be closed to the public. It's a choice, and many public bodies choose to discuss some matters more publicly, even when they could close the meeting. Other public bodies choose to discuss less and choose to invoke the exemptions perhaps more often than others. But this goes back to the policy statement at the beginning that directs exemptions to be construed narrowly. And oftentimes the public body understands that it's in their interest and the public's interest to discuss matters that could have been withheld or discussed behind closed doors, to nonetheless discuss them in public. When the members of the public body come out of a closed meeting, they are required to make another motion in the meeting, in the minutes, that we call certification. They vote to certify that during the closed meeting, they discussed only those matters they identified in the motion to go into the closed meeting, and also that they only talked about exempt matters. If any member disagrees with this characterization, that person is supposed to state his or her objections in the minutes and then vote no on the motion to certify the meeting. Now, despite what some elected officials say when asked by the press what happened in a closed meeting, there is nothing in FOIA that prohibits a member from talking publicly about what was discussed in that closed session. Now, there are plenty of other reasons, internal reasons, why someone would not want to discuss something publicly, but FOIA does not prohibit the public discussion of what happened in a closed meeting. Because remember, the meeting was closed at their discretion, therefore you also have the discretion to talk publicly. All these rules, by the way, that I've been going over, just so you know, they don't apply to the General Assembly, at least when it's in session. they are still required to have open meetings, but they just don't have to follow these rules that we've been going over. But so we will talk, though, briefly about electronic meetings. We're referring to teleconferences, video conferences, or remote participation by Skype or FaceTime or Google Hangouts, whatever. The current rules try to strike a balance between, using new technologies so that the public body can take advantage of them and be more efficient, but also balance and also trying to reach the public. And there's just always a balance between using these for the public body's benefit, so long as they don't take away from the public's right of access. So it's a evolving area of the law, and evolving because the technologies keep changing. The FOIA Council has studied committees frequently that go over these laws, and they recommended just recently a change to these rules that have to do with the location of where people participate from for state bodies, which I'll get to in a minute. So generally speaking, though, because state bodies and commissions have members from all over the state, and that state travel times can be long, and getting to and from a meeting can actually be prohibitive for some people, the rules allow state bodies to hold more electronic meetings than local governments and school boards. In fact, there are certain things that local governments and school boards can't do at all that a state body can. These state bodies can have people meet from remote locations, so long as, however, the quorum of the public body is in one location. So but two people could get together in a conference room at a remote participation site, and or a single member could participate from a different site. There just has to be some limits on how often they meet in this way. Both state and local level public bodies can allow a member to participate remotely if that person has an emergency or a personal matter to attend to, or is disabled. So any public body that does allow this kind of remote participation has to have a policy in place, though, stating how and when the option can be used. These policies are to guard against members of public bodies using these rules to somehow exclude the member who's participating remotely from actually participating. Now, because there are restrictions on when and how electronic meetings can be used, there have been questions over the years about whether emails exchanged among members essentially count as a public meeting. The Virginia Supreme Court has twice said no, they don't. The first time, which was over 10 years ago, there were days and days in between the members' back and forth emails. And the court said there's just no simultaneous exchange that is taking place in these emails, and simultaneous exchange is necessary to a meeting. The second time, there were a lot more messages exchanged, and they were exchanged up to and even at the public meeting, but the court still said that that wasn't a meeting because it still wasn't simultaneous. Now, since the rulings, group text messages, Facebook Messenger, among other things, allow for this simultaneous discussion where you have all the members present and everyone sees what everyone says at the same time. And some courts are now starting to rule that these exchanges in these chat rooms do violate state open meetings rules. Not the case in Virginia, but it is something to watch for. Again, this is one of those areas where technology is evolving and may change some of the definitions and application of state meeting and records laws. But it is important to remember that even if the messages exchanged don't constitute a meeting, they are still subject to disclosure under FOIA's records provisions, just like any other public record. The downside of that is that they're not going to be available in real time. You'll only find out about them after the fact. Now, if a violation of these procedures is suspected, a member of the public can file for an injunction to prohibit the public body from doing the same thing again in the future. There have been cases where a motion to go into closed session have been struck down, or as well as those cases that say that even if there were violations, the matters that were voted on can nonetheless remain in place. Now, the statute allows for the imposition of civil penalties up from $500 to $2,000, but only if the violations were made willfully and knowingly, and these penalties are exceedingly rare in their imposition. Now, if you're unsure about what the law does and doesn't require, or if you've got opinions about how the law on public meetings should be amended, I recommend that you follow FOIA, the FOIA Council meetings, that you subscribe to VCOG's newsletter and social media channels, and that you contact your local and state representatives to give your opinion on these matters. So that's it for now. Thank you for joining me this morning. I hope that this has been of help. If there are certain topics that you would like to see covered in future webinars or presentations, please let me know. Maybe put a comment in the comment box below. Also, in the comment box, feel free to pose any questions that you might have about what I said here. There's a good chance I said something and mixed up my words, like when I said that draft minutes were not public records. So feel free to add those comments below. And finally, if you're in the Richmond area tomorrow, we are having our second annual Pop-Up Sunshine Day. And it's at 9:30 at the Virginia Credit Union House, which is on 8th Street, across the street from St. Paul's Church and also near the Capitol. So we hope that you'll stop by to see some short presentations on transparency, as well as have some lunch and watch the 1970-something movie, All the President's Men, about the reporters who helped uncover what was going on in the Watergate scandal. So until then, thanks again for joining me, and happy Sunshine Week, everyone. Bye-bye.